You don't have to be much of an MMA fan to have seen this scene and have it burned into your memory. The image of Rory MacDonald before his 5th round title fight with Robbie Lawler shows a man pushed far beyond the limits of ordinary human endurance. Fans watching couldn't believe what they were witnessing that night.
Wow, how good is this?
It was a very high-paced fight. Not being able to breathe, I was suffocating with the blood and the high-paced action in your face. I was basically in survival mode.
Rory was right where he wanted to be, up on the scorecards, going into the final round of a dream he'd been chasing since he was 6 years old, and a prophecy that had predicted him as the future of an entire fighting nation. One he'd been trying to fulfill since UFC fans first laid their eyes on him.
Bet, man. Shout out to MMA on Point. Hey, man, like, comment, subscribe, bro. We finally here, Rory MacDonald, man. Y'all been told me to do Rory, bro, so we finally here. I already did that boy Robbie Lawler, so, hey, after this video, go check that Robbie Lawler reaction. But, hey, check out the other Legends playlist, you know what I'm saying? But, hey, let me know in the comments what you want me to do next. Let's go ahead and see what
Chapter 1, Canadian Pioneers. There's always been certain countries that have existed as powerhouses in the mixed martial arts world. Obviously Brazil, where the Gracies had come from, who developed Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and who started the UFC, and their country has a long history of bare-knuckle MMA or Vale Tudo, along with a heritage of Muay Thai gyms and legends. America has always also been full of MMA talent. It's a massive country with people from all walks of life. The US is also where some of MMA's first super gyms started to develop, with people eventually flying from all over the world to train there. In fact, at UFC 1, the show was all Americans with just the one Brazilian, Royce Gracie, and of course, one Dutchman. In fact, if you go and write out a list of the most dominant champions ever in MMA, it's basically a list of Americans and Brazilians. And of course, Russia had similar success with Fedor and Khabib, although that came a little later. But there's one GOAT who stands out coming from a country of his own, Georges St-Pierre from Canada. And you might look at that list today and see Canada as a bit of an outlier. But back when he was champion, his place on that list as a Canadian didn't feel out of place at all.
So he was the first Canadian champion
since the very beginning of the sport, the country has been involved in the roots of mixed martial arts. As early as UFC 3, 6'2" Canadian karate champion black belt with sunglasses that fired up fans with his now legendary phrase,
"You're coming on? Come on!"
Howard wasn't as skilled as Brazil's Gracies or even what US competitors like Ken Shamrock were doing, but he still became the first Canadian to make it to a UFC final. And then just a few months later at UFC 5, another Canadian made his debut, Dave Beneteau, and what do you know, he also made it to the final. Only a couple of shows later, Big Daddy Goodridge walked into the UFC. He'd been an amateur super heavyweight Canadian boxing champion, and he quickly became a fan favorite amongst everyone just because of his massive size and ability to create unpredictable knockouts. In 1997, he even went down to Brazil to compete in the first ever IVC Vale Tudo tournament, and he won the whole thing. Then, the following year, in 1999, the first real Canadian MMA star made his UFC debut at UFC 17, Carlos Newton.
Newton. I see him, I think I just seen him in a fight in a video with Matt Hughes. Y'all want a reaction to Carlos Newton? Let me know in the comments, man, but I don't really know too much.
Canada. Newton had achieved a black belt under the Gracie system and had started MMA at just 19 years old, fighting giant dudes in no holds barred. While he was off doing that though, another Canadian by the name of John Alessio had won the Super Brawl tournament in Hawaii and then was brought into the UFC immediately to fight against Pat Miletich. Alessio didn't win, but he was the first Canadian to fight for a belt. And over in Japan, Carlos Newton's picking up wins. He comes back to the UFC and he fights Pat Miletich for the title and he wins it with a bulldog choke. Canada already has a champion in Carlos Newton.
Oh, damn, he went at the bulldog choke. Hold on.
And he wins it with a bulldog choke. Canada already has a champion in Carlos Newton, crowned in 2001. A year or so later, Dennis Kang had a win streak in 2003 that went for 23 wins in a row. And while Canada's in this massive boom of success, in 2004, Georges St-Pierre arrives in the UFC to make his debut. 22 years old, already 5-0 and the TKO welterweight champion, and he'd also just submitted a guy called Pete Spratt, who himself was supposed to be going to the UFC to fight Carl Parisian. So with that win, the world was about to meet GSP.
My dream is to go fight in UFC, you know, since I'm young. I saw Royce Gracie when I was young.
Carl Parisian is a seriously tough UFC debut for anyone, and when Georges St-Pierre beat him, he impressed fans and the UFC brass. They could tell they might just have something special on their hands with GSP. A few months later, they matched him up with Jay Hiron, who was also undefeated at the time, and George just blew right through him. He was catapulted into title contention, going up against Matt Hughes for the vacant title that BJ Penn had left. Unfortunately for George, he didn't get the job done that night. He was just a little too young and not as experienced as
Matt
Hughes.
was a
He got 2 more wins in the UFC, and they decided to pull the trigger and put on an event entirely to showcase Canada. UFC 58, US versus Canada. It sounds more like a Ultimate Fighter season. Yes, this really was, in 2006, a coming out party for Canadian mixed martial arts, which had done enough already at this point to be able to draw itself against the US. By this point, the Great White North had produced several promising fighters: Sam Stout, Mark Hominick, Georges St-Pierre, and David Loiseau. But another massive fight was, of course, George going up against the returning BJ Penn, who'd just been fighting in K1.
Yeah, we did like a Canada versus USA card, and I hated it. I even openly, admittedly smashed it before we did it, but I don't like it. Georges St-Pierre comes down in the United States and fights an American, and more people will cheer for Georges St-Pierre. 2
of the biggest young stars going head-to-head, USA versus Canada. While St-Pierre would beat BJ and set himself up for a title shot, David would lose in the main event. By the end of the year, Georges St-Pierre was given a rematch with Matt Hughes, and he head-kicked him in round 2 to hold up the UFC belt as the 2nd Canadian champion. It wasn't long until UFC 83 that, for the first time ever, an event was then scheduled in Canada. And what do you know? It became the fastest selling UFC show of all time. It broke the attendance record when 21,000 people showed up to watch George rematch Matt Serra and reclaim his title for Canada.
I think Georges St-Pierre he's the pound-for-pound biggest pay-per-view star in the world. I don't know how this kid isn't buried in blue-chip sponsorship from Canada. He represents his country, his sport, and the title like no one else.
The show had been an enormous success. GSP had absolutely carried MMA to the Canadian lands.
This market is so important to us that it's time to open an office here. It's gotten to the point where Canada is so big and continuing to grow. It's time. It's probably overdue. We probably should have done this earlier.
Just a few months later, another Canadian, Patrick Cote, fought for another UFC title. He went up against Anderson Silva, and it wasn't a very well-received fight, but that makes 5 Canadians to fight for a UFC title so far by 2008. In fact, the first show in Canada had been so successful, the UFC went back the next year, and they broke the attendance record again at UFC 97. Dana had been so blown away by the success and support of the Canadian people.
I'm not just kissing your ass because I'm in Canada. Canada is the mecca for mixed martial arts right now. I honestly don't think there's too many places in the world where we could go and sell 22,000 tickets as fast as we did here.
But he also said something else, a prediction, at least a part of a prophecy, that from this new wellspring of MMA, a new apprentice would come forth.
Eventually, there's going to be a whole new generation coming that grew up with the UFC.
Following the lineage of Carlos Newton right along now to Georges St-Pierre, it only made sense that the next Canadian champion would be someone who could follow in the footsteps of the legendary fighter Georges St-Pierre. Chapter 2, A New Hope. You might look back at the efforts of Harold Howard in the early UFCs and not give him much credit, but Canada's future was raised in the 90s on early videotapes and performances like that of our mate Howard. Far away from the Canadian cities that would soon host the biggest UFC event ever, and nestled deep in the northwest in a town with less than 10,000 people, a young Rory MacDonald was raised watching the men he viewed as literal heroes battle each other on videotape every night in the UFC. His dad hung a heavy bag in the yard, and Rory got his start in martial arts just copying what he saw on TV. The Canadian city of Quesnel is small, and its main employment for men is forestry. But 6 hours down the road in the city of Kelowna was one of the best MMA gyms in the country. The Toshida Mixed Martial Arts Academy was founded by this guy, David Lee, in 1998. He's a lifetime martial artist and a veteran of the early years of the sport who had to retire young and turned his attention to the betterment of Canadian MMA. David successfully lobbied the city of Vancouver to allow the first professional MMA show to ever be sanctioned in the city's history. At just 14 years old, Rory MacDonald had found his Obi-Wan Kenobi, and MMA completely took over his life. School was now pointless. Why do maths when you can do submissions? He would literally count the minutes till the bell rung so he could get out and get back to training. But of course, no one, not his friends nor family, believed him when he said he was going to be a fighter. But he took to the sport like a fish to water, training from day one just MMA. No previous martial arts background, no traditional base, just straight mixed martial arts baby, 100% moldable by Master David Lee. At just 16 years old, he was ready to make his pro debut, and his parents had to sign the permission slip.
First time here in the King of Cage, just want to have fun and show my skills.
16 years old,
Show my
fighting out of
skills.
Bushido Fighting Arts
Oh,
Academy.
nah.
Rory MacDonald above
Looks like he about to put hands on
Big
somebody.
debut.
Yep, it's like a wolf in sheep clothes. That's what for what I understand, because everybody here is raving about it.
Nervous as he was, Rory secured a rear naked choke in just 2 minutes. Obviously, a 16-year-old getting a pro win in the first round didn't go unnoticed, and his next fight was going to be broadcast on national television. But as with all prophecies, they're always often about more than one person. And while we've been talking about Rory MacDonald, another kid the very same age was also just starting his MMA career. His name was Jordan Mean. His dad, Lee Mean, had started Rumble in the Cage, and since Jordan had been training since age 4, his dad was putting him in fights from 11 years old. And now for Jordan's pro debut, he wanted to fight this new child prodigy, Rory MacDonald. Rory made the trip down to Lethbridge, Canada, Jordan's hometown, to decide who was going to be Canada's next top prospect. And make no mistake about it, this event had been put on for Rory's opponent.
The toughest kid in Lethbridge, Jordan!
His dad is doing the bloody commentating.
He started to grow, get some size on him, and he's been fighting adults, and now he gets to fight another someone under 18, which is a treat, I guess.
MacDonald kept taking him down until he found himself in mount, and he kept hunting until he found another rear naked choke.
Get him up out of there.
Very happened,
yeah.
Damn.
At 17 years old, Rory was now 3-0 as a pro, but that
Get
wasn't
him up
enough.
outta
By
there.
the end of 2006, he'd stacked up 5 more wins now as a pro, in pretty much his first year in the sport. King of the Cage were ready to give him his first title shot against the 22-fight veteran Cajun Johnson, who in the build-up, even though he'd trained with Rory, was fully confident the kid was just too young and way too inexperienced. But by this point though, Rory MacDonald was looking way less like a boy and more like a fully grown man that was manhandling the experienced fighter. After more ground and pounds, it was clear Rory was something special, and at 18 years old, he was already a champion.
Champion at 18? That's crazy.
Of course, Rory might be putting on these dominating performances, but he was still the same awkward and soft-spoken kid.
I go in there with like my mindset and I don't let anything change it. I'm focused. I've always wished I could be a champion, you know. I was blessed with the opportunity to become a champion, and God carried me through it. We trained extremely hard.
Rory wouldn't fight for another year, focusing on training and developing his skill set. When King of the Cage did pick up the phone, it was to fight for the World Lightweight Championship title against Clay French, a man who'd previously been the champ and even been over to Japan to fight in the Sengoku tournament and guys like Shinya Aoki. But nothing at this point seemed to be able to stop the rise of Rory MacDonald. He knocked out French in the second round, making it 7 wins, all by finish.
You are considered one of the best young 170-pound, actually at any weight in the country we ever see in the UFC.
I really hope so. Pretty soon, within the year, I'm hoping, but you know, I don't know how things are going to work out. My dream is always to fight in the UFC, and we've been talking with them, with Zuffa and Joe Silva. We'll take it from there.
And all he had to do was stay on the path. After all, he was already walking in someone else's footsteps.
Is there anyone in the UFC you kind of have your eye on or want to compete against?
Well, yeah, George St. Pierre, but that's not right away, that's for sure.
I mean, how would you feel about potentially facing him down the road?
It would be a dream come true, you know, like a hero to me. So, you know, it's like the biggest dream in my life to be able to fight with that guy.
He wouldn't have to wait long to meet his hero, however, as just a few months later, his coach David Lee got in touch with Dennis Kang, the veteran I mentioned earlier. They contacted Faraz Sahabi, and Rory was on his way to the famous TriStar gym to train with the likes of GSP and help him prepare for UFC 100. It was the start of a relationship that would carry Rory to a lot of future success. MacDonald fought out the end of his King of Cage contract as discussed with the UFC and was ready to make his debut at the start of 2010. The news broke about Rory and many fans were very excited, but some were a bit confused about another welterweight prospect when GSP was on the top of his game. But at the time of his signing, Rory was also the youngest fighter in the UFC at just 20 years old, and he in his mind had laid out a 5-year plan that would take him to a world title. But his UFC debut was not going to be easy, and going into it, he was suffering a bad case of the UFC jitters.
His debut is one of the most anticipated of 2010.
His opponent was a former King of the Cage champion as well, Mike Gaiman. Now, this guy had been fighting since Rory was 10, and the commentators couldn't wait to talk about how the young Canadian might just be the future.
He has trained MMA since day one, and that was at the age of 14. And Joe, you and I have always talked about the next generation of fighters.
Rory was able to take him down, use his superior top game, and get another submission win.
I was actually disappointed because I felt like I had more to show. I had more potential to show the UFC.
Rory had admitted that he was pretty nervous making the walk to the UFC cage for the first time, and the matchmakers literally did him no favors after that. He went from the prelims of a UFC fight night to his next fight, opening up the main card of the next pay-per-view in Canada. It was a massive step up, but also in competition. He was matched up with the former WEC champion Carlos Condit, a 30-fight veteran with more finishes than years Rory had been alive.
I was super nervous, especially...
They had that boy out there young. He was just out there just... Bro, that's crazy. Damn. That's hard though.
For whatever reason, for my fight against Carlos Condit, uncomposed, you know? Everything was rushed in the back room. The warm-up was all wrong and everything was just messed up. And then the energy in there was just like intense, you know? So
Rory walked out to kick off the pay-per-view to a deafening roar. He was the only Canadian on the main card. If the fight night had been overwhelming, this must have been another level. And remember, he is still the youngest fighter in the UFC at this point. He went toe-to-toe, strike for strike, and slugged it out with one of the best welterweights in the world. Going into the third, Greg Jackson was really trying to fire up Condit.
This is 5 minutes or more. Now you go and give it to me.
Rory was up on the scorecards, but suddenly it all slipped away.
And I just wanted to destroy. I was very aggressive even into the third round. I was caught with a hook, but it caught me in the side of the head and the temple here. I remember everything just leaving me, my adrenaline, my gas. I really just, it was like one punch gassed me out. It felt like it was a bizarre feeling.
MacDonald started fading, Condit got on top of him, and in the closing seconds, he was TKO'd.
My first loss was a wake up. I was undefeated. I had all these things in my head about being an undefeated fighter, you know, maybe going down in history as like some phenom or something like that. I needed that taste, that experience to teach me that's not what it's really about. It's not about going down in like the history book. The experience and the growth as a martial artist, being able to take the loss as a man, you know, be honest with yourself and learn from the experience to get better and to grow.
I know that hating shit. I know that losing shit.
Chapter 3, The Red King Rises. It was a setback for the Canadian Prodigy, and he was no longer undefeated. Some people said he was pushed too soon against Carlos. Others thought it had been an early stoppage. Carlos had been a multiple-time world champion who was on a title campaign of his own, and the loss only motivated Rory further, and he moved his training camp to TriStar.
Basically, I had traveled out there since I was 18. I was a little bit frustrated with training partners. I didn't feel like I was training like a professional and it was gonna bring me to the next level. I felt like it was where I needed to go at that age.
The UFC already had their next date booked for Canada. It had become the beating heart of the community, where some of the biggest fights were being held. And for UFC 129, they set about creating their biggest show ever.
Take George St. Pierre anywhere in the world. Fans go crazy over this guy. You know, he is the most famous guy ever to come out of Canada as far as an athlete goes.
They were heading to the Rogers Center for GSP against Jake Shields, the former Elite XC and Strikeforce champion, and the venue held 55,000 people, and they sold 42,000 tickets in just the first day. Of course, Rory was given a place on the card, and they gave him the perfect opponent to bounce back from against Condit, Nate Diaz. At this point in his career, this was typical for Nate. They put him up against Marcus Davis at Boston so he could be booed by the home crowd, and the same thing was happening at 129 against Rory. MacDonald had now spent a year at TriStar, changing his style and developing.
They always used to set up the Diaz brothers, man. Set them up for the fail.
Under new head coach Faraz Sahabi into a new and improved fighter.
I got put on a main card on one of the biggest cards in UFC at the time. Well, it was the biggest card in UFC at the time. There's a lot of TriStar guys. George was fighting, McDessie, me, a couple other guys. It was like a teammate vibe. and I like that.
Rory looked like a complete animal in this fight. Spurred on by the Canadian crowd, he attacked Nate from bell to bell.
He's calling me bitch, called me pussy a couple times, egged me on, but really it didn't even shake me at all. You know,
he looked like a young John Jones when he started suplexing him over and over.
He kept turning his back, trying to get back to his feet, so I would do it again. I remember the crowd going crazy over it. It felt like I was like ragdolling someone, so that was a cool feeling.
It had been a complete mauling, but it wasn't a finish. Rory proved, though, he was still getting even better.
No, I'm going to continue training and keep getting better. You know, I got a lot to work on very young.
Some people are saying you're the next big thing in the UFC. They're saying you're the next great star. How does that make you feel?
It's hype, but you know, I'm confident that I could reach those expectations of me.
After such a clinical and dominant win from Rory, he repeated it just a few months later with a TKO win over another veteran, Mike Pyle.
You know, I've heard it described as the next George St. Pierre, but he might have more potential than that.
Fans were pretty shocked to hear, though, that his next fight would be against Che Mills, someone most fans considered a massive step down. It was a co-main event on a pay-per-view, though, which again was a big step up for Rory.
This is where I want to be. These are the steps that are necessary for me to take, get me comfortable with, you know, being, you know, a future champ, a future main eventer. So yeah, you know, it's necessary that I go through pressure situations. This is my future, right?
And with a few wins under his belt, fans wanted to know if we would ever see Rory now challenge his mentor, GSP.
Until the time comes where you might have to face somebody like George St. Pierre?
We wouldn't fight. We're teammates. I'm sure you asked him that. You know, we're friends, and I'm learning constantly from George. So I'll be patient, take my time, wait my turn. He's got seniority.
So for Rory, it seemed that in that year at TriStar, things had changed. He'd gone from wanting to challenge GSP to now saying they're good friends, and he would instead wait for his own chance to fight for the UFC belt. MacDonald still went out there and in 2 rounds blew away.
What y'all think about it? Y'all think teammates shouldn't fight, or y'all just think the teammates should get in there and have that friendly phase? What y'all think?
Che Mills with another TKO finish. Of course, post-fight, Dana White heard that Rory had said he wouldn't be fighting GSP, and his response was kind of hilarious, stating, "Why are you in this? You are in this to become world champion. I guarantee you, if Rory looks at fucking GSP's bank account, he'll want to beat the shit out of him." It was actually after this performance from Rory that we got to hear GSP speak a little more publicly about the 13-1 21-year-old Prodigy.
I believe he's going to be champion. Every day he got better, stronger. Being champion is not only physical, it's a lot here. He's got it. I'm not interested in fighting him.
June came around and MacDonald surprisingly had a call out ready.
I was having dinner with Dana, and he happened to mention that BJ was interested in fighting me. So, you know, I didn't know he was coming back from retirement, so immediately that sparked interest in me.
BJ Penn was another legend, another test that GSP already passed, and a win over another MMA prodigy would get Rory tons of attention from the fans. It was first booked for September to go on the Jones vs Vitor Belfort card happening in Toronto, but Rory received a cut in training and had to pull out. The Canadian event went ahead without him. GSP was defending his title against Carlos Condit, who'd only continued to win since getting past Rory. And this one was going down in Montreal, but Rory was again not on the card. But he'd done enough at this point to almost separate himself from the George narrative. Fans were getting used to his relaxed and humble attitude towards fighting, to the suits he'd wear at press conferences, looking less like an athlete and more like the Canadian psycho instead.
It's Rory, you know, he changed his style. It's him. I don't know why he do that. But he like it, you know, so it's good for him. If he feel good, it's good for him. Yeah, it's different. I was surprised when I see, but it's a style, you know.
One of, if not the most fascinating stories in MMA right now. His demeanor blows me away. He sits there at the Q&A like we're all bothering him being here, but he just tells you what's on his mind. There's no filter. His style, the way he's handling himself right now. And I know they probably don't like me continuing to say this. I truly believe that if given the opportunity, he will fight GSP. I don't think GSP wants to fight him, but I think Rory MacDonald is a killer now.
Me and George are not going to fight. Me and him are friends.
But I want to see that, though.
Close training partners.
He wants to be the greatest, not just in one division, but in possibly 2 divisions.
You gotta fight George to be the greatest, though, right?
He'd have to wait until December before he could get his hands on BJ Penn. And what was supposed to be a showcase for the new Prodigy turns into a beatdown that became a little hard to watch, especially when people felt like Rory wasn't trying to finish BJ Penn, like he was toying with the former legend. And in fact, people thought he was showboating. The crowd even started booing him.
Yeah, I don't turn off respect. It's not about that. It's just turning on aggression.
The guy put out a video what, 15 seconds?
I loved it.
Shirtless, shadow boxing in his yard, and everyone's like, I'm sold.
I was really surprised during that fight that he wouldn't go down. It was extremely tough, and afterwards I was a bit frustrated that I didn't maybe go take the extra risk to put him down.
It was another performance that put him right at the top of the division, in line for a title shot. George was even asked again in his title defense leading up to the end of the year.
I get the impression that he wants to fight you. What do you think?
What's up?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Yo, that man.
Then again in Canada, GSP defended his belt and stayed on top of the world with another massive UFC pay-per-view. And after Carlos lost, the UFC lined him up with Rory next, which would put him right in spitting distance of that UFC belt. But again, MacDonald was injured. This time he hurt his neck and the fight was scrapped. And if that fight had gone ahead, then perhaps the next stages of his career would have gone on a different path. Because he was certainly now more confident than ever and training like a champion.
It's like Roy fight would be muscles, you know, to be the full package fighter. It's addictive because of the glory.
Instead of Condit, Rory ended up facing Jake Ellenberger, who he got through. It went to a unanimous decision. But it wasn't enough for people to call for a shot. And even articles like this at the time were discrediting the praise he'd been getting. Combined with how he'd performed against BJ, it was starting to give people a bit of a bad taste in their mouths. But out of nowhere in February, like a cold wind blowing in, an anomaly returned to the division. Robbie Lawler, a veteran of the UFC since he himself was 20 years old, just like Rory, and he'd come back for the first time in 10 years. And just 5 minutes before Rory had walked out for Ellenberger, Robbie Lawler had head kick smashed Bobby Volkner apart and now loomed over the top of the division like an oncoming juggernaut. Rory's title shot was just inches away. But first, he'd have to take on another man seeking to fulfill a personal prophecy of his own. A win would mean he'd either finally fight GSP or he'd step aside or upper division and let Rory continue the Canadian legacy, as was predicted. Lawler, though, at the same time was trying to fulfill all that was expected of him when he was just 20 years old, and people thought he was the new breed of athlete and the future of the sport.
Robbie Lawler was Rory MacDonald at one point in time when he fought Aaron Riley.
It was an incredibly even back and forth fight until about 2 minutes left when Lawler bombed MacDonald with a thunderous left hand. It was enough for Robbie to take the decision, once again leaving Rory
I didn't even know they fought before that fight. I didn't know that.
Out of reach
Robbie
of his
beat him.
dreams.
The most frustrating part about that fight was the referee. He ruined the fight. I would get a takedown and I would get stood up. Basically no warning. You know, I really just felt like I was being unfairly reffed.
And that all happened right when perhaps Canada needed Rory to win the most. In the main event, GSP had barely managed to defend his title against Johnny Hendricks, and shortly after went on hiatus, leaving the
Johnny, boy, well, he hit GSP with a refrigerator, huh?
welterweight division unmanned by a Canadian for the first time in 6 years. The future for Canadian MMA was immediately unclear. GSP had been the pay-per-view star to bring massive shows to Canada. Would that continue without him? When it came to Rory and his prophecy, safe to say the whole country now turned their attention to him.
Right away, I was like, get me a fight. It kind of even woke me up a little bit.
He got right back on the title campaign, returning the next year with a phenomenal Fight of the Night performance against grappling master Damian Maia.
I wanted to get in there and I wanted to get into a good, hard-nosed, in-your-face kind of fight. All the techniques that we had kind of worked on to shut down Damian, it worked perfect.
Then the UFC did what they could to line him up to achieve destiny. They set Rory up with a co-main event on a pay-per-view for the first time in Canada against Tyrone Woodley. He'd just beaten Carlos Condit, the number 2 ranked guy. He was campaigning for his own title shot, and only one guy was going to move forward.
I don't feel pressure. I just have to fight to my potential, and the rest will take care of itself. Never felt better. So I have no excuses going into this fight. I'm at my best.
He absolutely controlled Tyrone that night, using his jab and constant pressure. It was a shutout performance and would be the only loss Woodley would have for the next 5 years. The response from the crowd, the media, the fans was massive.
How good does it feel to do it here in Vancouver?
It's amazing. And Rory was able to neutralize his speed and his power, and boxing skill and Muay Thai skill prevailed, I believe.
And honestly, that night, Rory sounded more confident than ever that he was gonna fulfill this long-running prophecy.
They should know that I'm ready, and one day, very soon, the belt will be mine.
But it didn't happen right away. A title eliminator had already been booked between Robbie Lawler and Matt Brown. It was a fight of the night classic if you haven't seen it, but Lawler came out on top and was going to be fighting against Johnny Hendricks in a rematch come December. Rory instead got another tough challenge. This was kind of the time period in the UFC where they just brought up Strikeforce, you had all these guys coming over. I mean, Robbie Lawler was one of them. The welterweight champ at the time of closing had been Tarek Saffiedine, and they were going to put him and Rory in a fight night main event in Canada where he was scheduled for 5 rounds for the first time. If there were any doubts about MacDonald as championship level before that fight, that well was completely drained dry because again, Rory looked absolutely incredible, and in 3 rounds, he finished Tarek.
Rory MacDonald with the stoppage win! We have never seen Saffiedine on the wrong end of a finish like that.
Rory by now surely had done all he needed to do to finally get his shot.
I think it goes without saying that I'm next for that title. I want that title shot. I want the winner of the next fight. Please, give it to me.
Rory MacDonald is going to get a title shot finally after his win, of course, on Saturday over Tarek Saffiedine. Not only that, he's getting the title shot in Canada.
He's better than all of them at this point in the game, has done more recently. I don't think that anyone's under the illusion that Rory MacDonald can be what GSP was, but I think they are trying to make sure they can keep the fire
that though.
alive in Canada.
Because even in the small amount of time since he'd left, the market had already started to crumble. They had to change their TV deal, and the recent shows just hadn't been hitting.
You know, they've had some not so great shows in Canada. They want to get back there, they want to hit it hard.
So you need a Canada star to have a great show in Canada? Damn, I mean...
Getting a title shot is the right call for all kinds of right reasons, and it's also about making sure Canada stays hot.
But despite all that, and despite Dana White promising that Rory was going to get his title shot, are you surprised that's not how things worked out? The Robbie Lawler and Johnny Hendricks fight in December was incredibly close, coming down to a split decision that Lawler won and claimed the title. But the UFC wanted to immediately run it back and planned a trilogy fight between the two men. Hector Lombard tested positive, and so his fight with Rory MacDonald was scrapped. Bad news for Hector, but as it turned out, great news for Rory MacDonald. It was finally time for him to follow his dreams. Chapter 4, Fulfilling the Prophecy. After following his childhood imagination into reality, Rory was now standing on a stage alongside his idol, his Obi-Wan Kenobi, after finally signing a contract to fight for the UFC belt.
I believe Rory is better than Robbie Lawler. I truly believe Rory MacDonald is the future of the welterweight division. He will be a champion, and he's gonna be there on top for a long, long time.
I feel very confident, you know. I don't want to sound cocky or anything, but you know,
man, say what you mean.
Killer, you know, I have my killer instinct, just like rushing through my thoughts all the time, you know, and so I decided to go with this. The lead up to that event was a lot of media 2 weeks before.
That was the same night Conor fought Aldo? Get the fuck out of here. That was the greatest night in fighting history.
Before we had to go to New York for like this Reebok unveiling. Just so much press and media build up for that fight. It was such a massive card.
It was the aligning of the Canadian prophecy, but it was completely being overshadowed by the main event. Conor McGregor finally going up against Joe.
But they ain't fight. I think this got rescheduled because Aldo got hurt.
Jose Aldo.
Oh, I think he fought Chad Mendes.
You know, really paid attention to who brings the heat every time. You know, Robbie's definitely one of those guys. Some guys talk, and some people just like to make it happen when it's the time to get physical.
Everyone who had helped him up to this point, all of the Canadian support that had been fused into him, everyone taken under his tutelage, it was all now down to Rory. It was slow at first, with the two men feeling each other out, but Lawler drove home a shot that absolutely smashed Rory's nose.
Rory's busted up a bit, Joe. That was that 1-2. And again, it was the 1-2, though, that really busted up Rory MacDonald.
I remember getting my nose broke by one punch. It definitely stressed me out. Every shot that was landing was making it bleed a lot more, or break a little bit more.
His face now shattered, Rory started firing back, and it looked like, for an instant, he was about to become the champion.
Oh, it might have hurt him. Yeah, he's staggered. He's hit. He's hurt. He's hit again. Robbie's in big trouble, Mike. Flying knee, elbow. 20 seconds.
Bomb, he was getting right.
Pouring it on.
But Lawler survived and went back to war.
The pain was one thing, it was very manageable, but it was more of the blood in my throat and in my lungs, having to deal with the gas, not being able to breathe too well.
After then trying to finish him and being battered for 20 minutes, Rory's tank was running on empty.
I remember being exhausted at the end of round 4, like I was basically in survival mode. I remember him being intense, I remember his energy. He was like, he wanted to kill me.
The two men then stared each other down, trying to battle their wills as much as their skills in this absolutely iconic moment.
Bro. I wasn't gonna let him just walk all over me, you know, like make me go sit down on a bench like a bitch. So I was gonna stay there as long as I had to until the ref separated it.
MacDonald was winning on the scorecards.
Oh my, look at fucking Robert Lawler's head, bro. Oh
He
my
already had to dig so deep just to stay in the fight. But as the 5th round wore on, Canada were watching their prodigy slowly getting broken apart.
5 more minutes, let's go. 5 minutes and you win.
And he was being very accurate with his left hand, popping me on the nose just at the end of his left hand. Because of all the damage I had taken, they were big shots. That was breaking me mentally.
He's hurt. This may be it. It is all over. Wow. Robbie Lawler remains the welterweight champion.
I come to fight. No matter what happens, I keep coming, and I'm trying to knock people out.
It was over. After finally reaching the end of the road, he physically couldn't push anymore. Robbie Lawler remained the UFC champion.
If you look at Rory MacDonald, nose was broken in the first round. Couldn't breathe, couldn't see, continued to fight. Rory got out back. They said, what year is it? He didn't know what year it was.
How do I sum up that fight? Fun. It was a fun fight.
Ain't no way.
There have been a lot of prodigies over
no
the years
way.
in the UFC, and very, very few have ever managed to make it all the way to a championship belt. Rory had arrived right at the changing of an era, where kids had watched the sport growing up. You look at today's landscape and you can find thousands of Rory MacDonalds all over the world. But it wasn't just MacDonald's championship dreams that died that day, as Canadian MMA would never be the same again. Including Rory MacDonald up until 2015, there had been 8 Canadian fighters who stepped up to compete and even won world titles. And when GSP was at his peak, it had been putting on literally the biggest events the UFC had ever dreamt of. For Rory, he continued to have a great career, leaving the UFC shortly after and finally becoming a world champion in Bellator, where he held gold for the first time since his King of the Cage title. MacDonald's UFC title shot came 9 years ago now, and although he's looked at as a beloved, well-respected, and of course incredibly skilled fighter, he never came close to walking in the footsteps of greatness that GSP has left, and to be honest, not many else really have or ever will. But all through it, he moved forward under the massive support from the country of Canada, who placed as much belief in him as they did in George. And after his title run came to an end now, 9 years since, not a single male Canadian fighter has fought for a UFC title. In the same year as Rory, Valerie Letourneau got a title shot, and then in 2019, Felicia Spencer.
Damn, who Valerie Letourneau is good?
In the same year as Rory, Valerie Letourneau got a title shot. And then in 2019, Felicia Spencer also fought for a title, and both in relatively weak divisions, if you want to be brutally honest. All's fair in mixed martial arts. It only makes sense that when a region lost its massive pay-per-view star, the popularity of the sport would start to decline. This 100% happened in Japan when stars like Sakuraba and then Shinya Aoki lost. And no matter everyone's positive expectations, doesn't mean you have the skills to go out there and do it. It was a lot of pressure on Rory. Perhaps it got to his head. All he'd known was comparisons to George since he got to the UFC. Rory MacDonald in some ways is a cautionary tale for so many to pin their hopes and dreams on a man who just had impossible expectations to live up to. And I think that became the story of his career for some, the man who couldn't fulfill those expectations. GSP sits atop a Mount Rushmore of a handful of the greatest ever. Rory was willing to put his body on the line and walk through hell to get his hands on the championship. Battered and broken, he crumbled. He couldn't bring the belt home to Canada. However, he did give them and the entire sport one of the most iconic moments ever. The Red King fully actualized. He gave everything he could to fulfill that prophecy. And in pushing himself to the limit, we got this fight, which some call the greatest of all time. He was likely never going to achieve what GSP done before him. I mean, very, very few have. But he will be forever remembered for this fight. One where he truly wore the crown of the Red King and drowned in his own blood.
Bro, ain't nobody gonna do what GSP did, bro. GSP, come on, Bro, first of all, it's not a lot of other people from America, from other countries that can't do what GSP did, let alone from Canadian. Well, from Canada. Hey, man, like, comment, subscribe, bro. This is crazy, bro. I'm glad we did this, bro. I didn't know he started this early. I didn't know he was from Canada. I didn't know his backstory. I'm glad we do. I'm just glad we be doing this, like, breakdown and story reacts to other fighters and boxers and stuff like this, bro. Because it'd be crazy to learn how people got their start and learn how they, you know what I'm saying, deal with adversity. But hey, like, comment, subscribe, bro. Let me know y'all want me to react to next. Let me see y'all next, man. Nobody.